What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Behind the Visor. It's your host, Stavros Katsantonis, free safety for the Hamilton Tiger Cats. And today, we got some decent news for you today. Commissioner speaking at the winter meetings, and there were some very real, very discussable updates that are, kind of worth breaking down. And then once we wrap that up, before we get to our kind of quick hits, we'll close the main show with our season recap segment, the bounce back from Labor Day, and remembering the late Ted Goveia. But let's start out with what came out today. Sort of the, I guess, not necessarily where were you when you saw it, but there was some news today that came out. I think that caught some attention, will definitely spark some headlines. Lots of great talk between the fans in our great league. But first thing that kind of stood out was the expansion talk getting real again. Commissioner Stuart Johnson said, and I quote, "I'd love to see a 10th team join us by 2030. I think it's a great date to focus on." Now, that's not a promise, but I would say it's a pretty clear target and gives kind of fans and markets a sort of timeline to react to. I think a 10th team is very important to kind of the, I guess, moving forward of our league. Right now being in that kind of 9-team state, kind of the scheduling conflicts that arise, the markets, the growth. Just having a 10th team would just kind of even that stuff out. There maybe some added new rivalries out in the Eastern Division. But I think, it's always cool to dream, but we all know that reality takes time, and we'd love to see a 10th team in this league. Hopefully, while I'm still in the league, that'd be awesome. If I can still be in the league by 2030, maybe we could bump it up to like 2028 or something like that. But, I plan to be in the league as long as possible. But if we could get something in by 2030, I'd love to be a part of that and just kind of see where the league goes from there on a 10 standpoint. But that's kind of the big vision. Now there's the football ops update that is very immediately relevant. And, today's kind of most actionable update is from the Rules Committee, which are 2 recommendations for 2026. Number 1 being the late half timing. The recommendation is to keep the late half timing mechanics unchanged, meaning the final 3 minutes of the game would still use a 20-second play clock that gets whistled in. And the other recommendation is eliminating regular season ties, which honestly, do we really need to have ties anymore? Like, when we watch sports, we want, you want either a winner or a loser. And same for when we're playing. Being in a tie is probably the most frustrating thing you can be in as a football player or just an athlete in general. So eliminating that, I think I'm all for. Let's get rid of the ties. Let's figure out a true winner or loser for as long as it takes. Make it a 6-hour game if we have to. I'm sure there'd be some scheduling conflicts that wouldn't allow that, but I think that'd be a great spot to start at. But right now it's 2 overtime rounds max, and if you're still tied, it's a tie, obviously. The proposed tweak is, if it's still tied after overtime, deciding by alternating plays from the opponent's 3-yard line until one team scores and the other doesn't. And, to be clear, those are recommendations. They're subject to approval by the Rules Committee, the league commissioner. Obviously, there's a bunch of hoops that it has to go through before that. But nevertheless, it is an interesting talking point. And honestly, how it could kind of change the late game strategy, right? There's the tempo of the game, substitutions, situational calls, right? Like most teams have their 2nd and 3 packages, 2nd and 4, 2nd and medium, right, type packages where, they might be running the ball, they could be passing the ball, maybe scheming up a run pass option, something like that. But that would be definitely interesting to see kind of how that would play out at the 3-yard line. I'm sure we'd see a lot more runs if it came down to those overtime rules. And just seeing, can defenses stop? How do defenses adjust? Do you blitz more? Do you play more man coverage? Do you not play more man coverage because maybe there's more pick routes and stuff like that? But it would be definitely interesting to see how that would play out in an actual football game. And now that we covered what's new today, let's sort of zoom out and take a look at what's already been established for 2026 and 2027. And if you've been online, you've probably seen the same bullet list being shared everywhere: 35-second play clock, benches on opposite sides, rouge adjustment, and then the field and goalpost changes that are to be coming in 2027. One of the cleanest "here's a list" summaries that circulated heavily is the Reddit CFL mega thread, and it kind of lays out the automatic 35-second play clock, team benches being on opposite sides of the field, which kind of is like a no-brainer. team benches shouldn't be on the same side, just for obviously player altercations that could happen. All that sort of stuff just doesn't need to happen. Substitutions being the biggest, obviously. And the Rouge, you no longer get a point if it's kicked out of the back of the end zone, and notes for field changes in 2027. But here's the part I think that matters. These just aren't rule notes. They change how you manage tempo, substitutions, and end of half situations. On defense, a 35-second play clock running changes how fast you get lined up, right? Because that 35-second play clock gets rolled in right as soon as the guy's down, resets. You got to get ready to go. There's no kind of, I guess, 10 or 15-second buffer from sometimes when there's a dog pile, or when I guess the nuance of a referee kind of having to blow that in kind of changes those things. Obviously, it's still up to debate if that's going to get changed in the 3-minute. They're talking about potentially, just keeping it the 20-second and 3 minutes, but I guess we'll kind of see how that goes. But like we said, the opposite benches just makes the most sense for substitutions and less chance for player altercations. And then the late half rules always matter the most because, again, that's when the game tightens the most. We see the most lead changes in those 3 minutes. The CFL game is, I would say those 3 minutes are crazy. Anyone can win in those games no matter what the score is. But that's sort of the explainer. But now let's touch on the fan side in, I guess a constructive way. Whenever change happens, people obviously react. And I've seen a ton of passion around this. One useful data point from earlier in the conversation is, 3 Down Nation reached out to all 9 teams. I think this was back in like September, asking fans asking if the teams had heard on fans canceling potential tickets. And, teams did respond with, what they were kind of seeing at that time. Again, those are, some of them are, the media trained answers, but it seemed like the general consensus between teams was that there wasn't, a mass exodus that they were seeing from fans, compared to what they were seeing on social media and what that would lead you to kind of believe. But, and again, that's not like really teams telling anyone how to feel. It's just more of a reminder that like online sentiment doesn't always equal actual renewals, and, those don't always match up perfectly. So I think the biggest thing is obviously just if you have questions, like, these teams are very reachable, very accessible, right? When you're calling your ticketing people and, asking. I actually, have a funny story of where I got to, I was making some calls to some season ticket holders, and one of them was actually kind of not too excited about the rule changes when it was, on the fence about renewing. But I guess being able to share my end of it from a player standpoint and how I feel like, the rule changes are good for, moving forward to the game. Obviously, everything is always up for debate, and you can argue from both sides, but just really letting that fan know that, hey, like, you're coming there at the end of the day to watch the product, watch, the players that are playing on the field. Yes, the uniqueness of the Canadian game is one thing that, people don't want to have touched or altered, but at the end of the day, you are coming to support, the logo, the rich history that the organization has, the players that are playing out there. So I think that's the biggest thing is just, clarity is easy to seek, but it's also easy to not get clarity when you're going on social media, you're going on even some of these Reddit echo chambers and just reading some of the things that you read, and it definitely can take you down the rabbit hole of, being on one side or the other on that debate. But now we're going to kind of close the main show out with our season recap segment before we get to our quick hits. And obviously where we left off last week was sort of the Labor Day, I guess, heartbreak that everyone suffered in that game, having their hearts ripped out on the final seconds of that game. But Labor Day is always sort of the checkpoint, if you may, of, who you are as a team. You kind of learn a lot about where you're at, where you're probably projected to go, from a playoff standpoint. They always say the season doesn't start until after Labor Day, and something that gets beat around, basically every team from the media side and from the inside as well, right? That's a lot of people do believe that, right? The last 9 games of the season are important, but I think for us the biggest thing is like, I think the thing that we locked in on is like the sense of urgency of like, you can't focus on, yeah, it was tough that we lost, but like, you have to move on quick. Like, we're still at that point first in the East. We controlled our own destiny. Like, we got to get off this sort of losing streak. I think by that time it was a 3-game losing streak that we were on. So we knew we had to bounce back. We knew we had to get a win. It was another, quick turnaround, short week versus, Montreal, rainy game. That one was definitely just an interesting one to be in, right? Because it's just more of your smash mouth football. The biggest thing was, Montreal not having their starting quarterback. I think they were down to like their third string quarterback that game. But it was a battle game. We ran the ball. We were able to kind of establish a run, a little bit of back and forth at the start, battle of defenses, and then we just kind of started to pull away on our own, and we're making plays. A couple of my guys making some big plays. Jamal Peters getting an interception. The big sack fumble recovered by my guy Miles Fox, and then just a great touchdown by Bo Levi Mitchell, who broke his personal, or hit his 1,000 rushing yard mark. In his career, which I did say was his slowest, or the slowest in CFL history, but that was a pretty cool thing to see him just, scamper out of the pocket, rush for a touchdown, and, break that 1,000-yard mark as well. So that was a big one. Then we kind of move on to, obviously, the next week. We're having to face Winnipeg. It's the, remembering Ted Goveia game, and obviously, that was just a tough one for us. He just recently passed away about the week or two previous, and the week of that game. Like literally, I think it was the morning of when we were playing that game, but we were kind of alerted to it earlier in the week that he just wasn't doing too well, and just a super tough one to be a part of. We definitely played for him that game, obviously being, against Winnipeg in Hamilton, his former team versus, the team he always dreamed of, being a GM of and being in control of. And there was nothing like just seeing, the atmosphere for that game, the fans that were there, the Team Ted shirts, the Team Ted sort of towels that everyone kind of held up when we were doing our, our moment of silence for him. It was just a very powerful game for us and very emotional game, in pregame, and just seeing how everyone responded to it. Like we were all bought in for Ted. We wanted to win that game for him. And it was, again, another battle game. We're battling against Winnipeg, who is, always a strong, formidable team. They've had a rich history of going to the Grey Cup for the last couple of years. And we knew it was going to be a battle. So we locked into that one. Again, just the defense just holding strong, making plays. I think we gave up one touchdown. Jamal Peters, again, my guy Petey had an insane interception on a screen play that he almost took to the house, but it was just, again, a crazy play that he made from obviously the film study, the athlete that he is. And then again, just our team just having that will to win. And it was definitely, again, an emotional game, but just a very excited locker room, I would say. Post game for the fact that we won. His family was all there, all of his friends, there for that game, and I think it was important. It was important. His impact beyond football, and what he was able to do to the game of Canadian football, and just the impact he had on me in the small amount of time that kind of I had met him. And he just, again, he's just one of those guys that just loves to talk about football, loves the game of football, understands the game, understands players, personnel, understands how to build rosters, and was just a great guy to interact with every day. And we'll never forget him and the mark that he left on me, and I'm sure our team as well. So with that, we'll get to our quick hits and we'll close things up here. So obviously the quick hit number one, the biggest, my favorite, was our team Hamilton re-signing and extending my guy Julian Howsare, ALL-CFL defensive end and most outstanding defensive player in the East and on our team. That's obviously that's the biggest one. That's my favorite. I'm glad he's back. He is a leader, on our defense, a big key piece that we had to get back for this year. So excited that he's back. Quick hit number two. There's a few items that the league listed at the winter meetings discussion topics. Obviously, the replay center mandate is another one they're looking into. Negotiation lists, a potential American player draft concept, which I think that would be actually pretty good moving forward. I think that would be big for American guys coming up here. Olympic guidelines for 2028. I'm excited to see that because I'd love to get a chance to represent Team Canada on the international stage. In flag football at the Olympics in 28 in LA. And finally, potential adjustments to free agency timelines. I think that would be obviously the biggest. I hope they adjust. I think they can move it up, maybe hopefully to early December. So, free agency gets done right after, the 2 weeks after Grey Cup, and we'll see what happens there. That'd be a really, really cool thing to see. And finally, our quick hit number three, keep an eye on those 2 rule committee recommendations, obviously being the late half clock adjustment. And if anything becomes official, we'll do a clean breakdown definitely to see, again, what happens with that. But again, that's it for today. Really appreciate you guys for listening. And if you want a deeper breakdown or want to hear some more stuff in next week, we're obviously going to talk. I think we got lined up next week is, unfortunately, in our recap will be the loss that we had against Winnipeg and kind of bouncing back from that and figuring out where our identity was. And we'll see kind of where that segue takes us next week. And we'll see you in the next video.